A lot of you guys suffer from tennis elbow and you would like to get rid of the pain because this is a very frustrating problem. You can't enjoy tennis because every time you hit a ball, you have this sharp pain in your elbow. And I have made many videos discussing what causes tennis elbow. It could be of wrong grip size, it could be of wrong racket that you're playing with, it could be the wrong type of string, it could be the wrong tension, or tennis elbow might be caused by something unrelated to tennis. But tennis elbow is also often caused by your technique. So in today's video, I want to show you some of the techniques that might give you tennis elbow. Now you have to understand that all strokes can give you tennis elbow. I'm going to put that out there as a general statement. But when we're talking about the biomechanics of a forehand volley, or a serve, the tennis elbow is protected to some degree. Again, this doesn't mean that you can't get tennis elbow from those strokes. You can, but it's less likely to happen. Why? Because when we hit the ball, the elbow is on the outside. In other words, it's protected. Also, the wrist naturally gives the forearm stability because it's laid back when we make contact. This is true for the forehand, independent of what grip you're using, even in a continental grip or in a full Western grip, the wrist is protected and you get natural stability. This is also true for a forehand volley, and interestingly, it's also true for the serve. When we make contact, the wrist is slightly extended and naturally gives the entire arm more stability. Now, unfortunately, when we hit the one-handed backhand drive, the one-handed backhand topspin, or the one-handed backhand slice, and especially the one-handed backhand volley, we don't have that natural stability because the wrist is in a more straight position. So players need to have more strength in their forearms to be able to maintain this stability at the moment of contact. Often players will hit a backhand volley and the wrist will collapse right at the contact with the ball. A lot of senior tennis players and a lot of the female tennis players suffer from the same problem. When they hit a backhand volley, the wrist collapses at contact. And this is one of the causes of tennis elbow, because what happens is when you hit a volley and your wrist collapses, it puts an incredible amount of strain on this part of your arm. And this not only can cause problems to your wrist, it can also cause problems with your elbow. So what do you do to get more stability on your one-handed backhand volley? Well, one thing that you can do, and this is something that I teach to my beginners, is give the racket as much support as you possibly can. You're going to hold on to the racket with your non-dominant hand, and you're going to try not to let go until the ball is very close to your strings, and then you can let go with your non-dominant hand and make contact with it. Now you're more likely going to maintain a more stable position of the racket head. A little too early. Hold the left hand on the strings longer. Excellent. The best beginner backhand volley I've ever seen in my life. If you separate your hands too quickly, now your balance is off and the wrist is more likely going to collapse and put stress on your entire arm. Now, doing this volley technique will not only save your elbow, but it's going to make your volleys more consistent, more powerful. And this is something that you should try to do regardless whether you have pain or not, and that is maintain the stability of the racket head. But some players, regardless if they try to keep their non-dominant hand as close to the contact as possible, still because their wrist and their forearm is weak, the racket collapses. So what do you do then? Well, you have to strengthen your forearm. And the way you can do that is by hitting a lot of volleys against the wall, or you can do exercises where you strengthen the hand and the forearm muscles. One of the classic exercises is squeezing one of these devices that strengthens your hand and the forearm. This will have a direct positive impact on the stability of your hand and forearm when you make contact on your backhand volley and on your forehand volley as well. Now, when it comes to the one-handed backhand slice, some players experience something very similar where the wrist collapses right at the moment of contact, and now the entire impact of the ball goes right into the arm. So what needs to happen on the one-handed backhand slice is that the hand needs to be in a slight extension through the entirety of the stroke. You don't want your wrist to flex. So if you have a slice where there's movement in your wrist like this, where the wrist snaps down, this will have a very bad effect on your arm and might be a cause of tennis elbow. So very similar to the volley, you want to make sure that you have a strong forearm, strong hand muscles to be able to maintain the proper angle of your wrist throughout the stroke. But also you want to build the correct fundamentals into your slice, because a lot of players are just way too sloppy on their slice. Maybe they're over hitting their slice and hitting too hard, and they don't really have control over the shot. So it's about recalibrating this shot, learning the fundamentals, and making a clean, continuous stroke that doesn't involve any movement of the wrist shortly prior, at, and after contact. Now, let's get to the shot that's the absolute #1 tennis elbow killer, and that's the one-handed backhand, and especially on players that don't possess a lot of topspin. If players are hitting the one-handed backhand more flat, and if they're using the wrong technique, this can severely impact the arm because all the pressure is absorbed on this side. Now, it really shouldn't be this way, because when we're hitting the backhand volley or the one-handed slice backhand, we have a continental grip. And if you look under my hand, I got the bottom part of my fingers holding the racket, so there's very little support there. However, when we're talking about a one-handed backhand with a Eastern backhand grip or a semi-Western grip, now the thumb is underneath the racket, so we naturally have more support on the one-handed backhand, and a collapsing of the racket head is less likely to happen. However, having said that, I have seen some players at the recreational level that play with an Eastern backhand grip. Despite the fact that there's more natural support for the racket, they still collapse the racket head underneath the handle when they hit a regular one-handed backhand, and this can impact the arm in a bad way. But the reason why the one-handed backhand is the #1 tennis elbow destroyer compared to the one-handed backhand slice and the one-handed backhand volley is because, #1, this is a shot that's used more, generally speaking, and it's also a shot that's hit a lot harder. See, the volley is more of a deflective shot. We're working with the pace of the incoming ball. The one-handed slice backhand is more of a finesse shot, but players generally take cuts on their one-handed backhand, and if these cuts are performed with poor technique, this can destroy the elbow. Now, on my website, intuitivetennis.com, I have a whole collection of videos that deals with problems at the rec level. I've been teaching rec players for many, many years, and I've been able to establish the most common errors on every stroke, but especially on the one-handed backhand, there are a few errors that I see from a lot of players pretty much across the board at any recreational level. And the most common mistake is that when players hit their one-handed backhand, they're using the arm in isolation. The body is not helping the arm. So think about it this way. When you're hitting your backhand with just the arm alone, with the body not helping, the arm is absorbing all the impact of this swing. And remember, you're hitting the backhand naturally with the weak side of the arm, where the elbow is exposed to the impact. So what must be done is the following. The arm has to be supported by the entire body. There has to be torso rotation. I've made a tremendous amount of one-handed backhand videos on my YouTube channel. You can check them out by simply typing in Intuitive Tennis one-handed backhand. One of them with Shamir got over 1 million views. And you should familiarize yourself with the fundamentals on this stroke. Because again, the one-handed backhand should not be the cause of tennis elbow if it's performed with the correct fundamentals. Now, I talked briefly about the topspin one-hander being less dangerous for the tennis elbow compared to the flat one-hander. I'm going to tell you why. Because even with poor fundamentals on a topspin one-handed backhand where players are rolling the arm in isolation, this is less likely going to impact the elbow than snapping on the ball in this way. This impacts the elbow at a more severe way. So you should try to get topspin on your one-handed backhand by employing a more vertical swing path and going as high as you possibly can. But at the same time, you have to use your body to accompany the arm, to accommodate the arm, to make this stroke truly an effortless one. If you don't, if you continue to slap at the ball with a bent arm, all the impact is going to go into your elbow, and this is a dangerous thing to do. Unlike the forehand, the one-handed backhand cannot be hit with a bent arm. You have to have a full extension, whether you start this extension in the prep phase, a la Shapovalov or Dominic Thiem, or most players on tour will actually extend their arm upon the racket drop. In either case, you have to come at the ball with a straight arm, make contact with a straight arm, and finish with a straight arm. If indeed the arm is bent throughout the swing, the impact on the elbow is going to be greater. And how about the two-handed backhand? Well, here the danger for tennis elbow is not quite as high because we have the help of the non-dominant hand and the pressure is more evenly distributed. So the two-handed backhand is not a big risk for tennis elbow. I know what you're thinking. If you have a one-handed backhand, should you switch to a two-handed backhand? I've talked about this many times. If you look at juniors, they very naturally develop a two-handed backhand. However, at the adult recreational level, the two-handed backhand is the more complex shot to learn. It does involve more rotation. The one-handed backhand is the far easier stroke. So you don't necessarily have to switch to a two-handed backhand. You can try, but this is not something that you must do to avoid tennis elbow. You can learn a fundamentally sound one-handed backhand technique, strengthen your forearm, strengthen your hand muscles, and save yourself from tennis elbow, even if you have a one-handed backhand. Now, how about the two-handed backhand volley? I am not opposed to the two-handed backhand volley. After all, one of the greatest doubles players in the history of the WTA, Martina Hingis, used a two-handed backhand volley. However, there's a big disadvantage to volleying with two hands on the backhand side because naturally you have less reach. You will have to take an extra step often, and naturally there's going to be a little bit less feel when you play with two hands. So if you're someone who's always had a two-handed backhand volley, you're probably okay. If you're someone who is switching from a one-handed backhand volley to a two-handed backhand volley, you will make your volley worse. So instead of doing that, I want you to follow the advice that I gave earlier in this video on the one-handed backhand volley. And even though that volley is going to be struck with one hand, you're going to be safe from tennis elbow. So guys, tennis elbow can be a frustrating thing, but there's a solution. I've made many videos on tennis elbow and I highly recommend that you watch them. You need to take care of your technique, you need to take care of your equipment, and also being fit doesn't hurt. Doing tennis elbow exercises, there are many of them out there. I made a video with Anna a while back. I highly recommend that you do those as well. Take care of all the factors, and when you do that, there's a good chance that you will be able to get rid of your tennis elbow.